He expected chains, not sunlight. He expected to be locked in a gray barracks, not standing in front of a white farmhouse, with a porch swing and a dog sleeping under it. Private Giovanni Rinaldi squinted against the glare of the American morning as the truck engine died and silence settled over the yard. Somewhere in the barn, a cow lowed lazily. Chickens scratched at the dirt as if the war did not exist. He stepped down from the truck with the other Italian prisoners, boots hitting dry earth, hands still behind his back out of habit, even though the Americans had not cuffed them. His uniform was gone, replaced by heavy work clothes that smelled of detergent and canvas. No insignia, no flag, nothing to show who he had been before the surrender. Just a number on his chest, and a language in his mouth that most people here could not understand. He had crossed an ocean expecting hatred. In the camp behind barbed wire, he had expected punishment. When he heard they were sending him to work on a farm, he expected something worse. Back-breaking labor, shouted orders, and just enough food to keep him standing. Instead, he saw a boy, maybe 10 or 11, hair messy, shirt too big, staring at the prisoners with wide blue eyes. Not with fear, with curiosity. The boy whispered something to the older man beside him. His father Giovanni guessed, and the man nodded, eyes narrowed, trying to judge these strangers who had arrived on his land. Sergeant climbed down from the front of the truck, clipboard in hand. "This is Rinaldi," he said, pointing with his pencil. "Giovanni, good worker in camp, you got him for harvest." The farmer wiped his hand on his pants and stepped forward. Up close, Giovanni saw sun-cracked skin and shoulders shaped by years of lifting, not by marching. This man had never worn a uniform. His war was here in the soil. The farmer held out his hand. For a second, Giovanni didn't understand what was happening. A handshake. For a prisoner. He glanced at the guard, as if asking permission. The sergeant just shrugged. Giovanni reached out slowly and took the farmer's rough, calloused hand. The grip was firm, not aggressive, not testing his strength, just human. "Name?" the farmer asked. Giovanni swallowed. "Giovanni," he said, voice dry. "Joe." The farmer replied instantly, as if the translation were obvious. The boy grinned. "Hi, Joe." Giovanni didn't know whether to correct them. He just nodded and let the name settle uncomfortably on his shoulders, like a coat that didn't quite fit. He expected to be taken straight to the fields. Instead, the farmer pointed toward the house. "Breakfast first," he said. Giovanni thought he had misheard. Breakfast? For a prisoner? In Italy, even free civilians had begun skipping meals. Bread lines grew longer. Coffee was a memory. Here, the first words on American soil away from the camp were about food. The sergeant checked his watch. "You've got them until dusk," he said. "They know the rules. Don't give them weapons. Don't let them wander. They work. You sign the paper. They get paid in coupons." He slapped the side of the truck, and it drove away in a cloud of dust, leaving Giovanni and the other POWs standing in a yard that smelled of hay and wood smoke. The farmer motioned for them to follow. Inside the house, the air was warm with the smell of frying fat and something sweet. The kitchen was small but neat, with a checked tablecloth and sunlight spilling across it like spilled milk. Giovanni froze at the threshold. This was not where a prisoner belonged. He had imagined being fed at the back door, a plate in his hands, eating standing up in the yard like a hired animal. Instead, the farmer's wife turned from the stove, wiped her hands on her apron, and said something in English that he didn't fully catch, but he understood the gesture. She tapped the back of a chair. "Sit." His muscles refused to move. "I stand," Giovanni managed. "Please, I am prisoner." The word tasted bitter in his mouth. The woman frowned slightly, not in anger, but in confusion. The farmer chuckled under his breath. "You worked all the way out here already," he said. "You'll work all day. You're not eating on your feet. Sit." The boy slid into a chair and stared at Giovanni openly. Without quite knowing how, Giovanni found himself lowering onto the wooden chair, not at the far corner of the room, not at a separate stool, but at the table, beside a child whose country he had fought against. The woman set a plate in front of him. Eggs, fried potatoes, a biscuit glossy with butter. It looked like the kind of breakfast he'd last seen in a movie theater newsreel before the war. They did not pray in Latin the way his mother had in Italy. The farmer bowed his head in a simple, quick grace, murmured thanks, a few words about the boys overseas, and then amen. Forks scraped plates, cups clinked. No one watched his every bite. Giovanni hesitated, unsure whether he was allowed to begin. The boy nudged his arm. "Go on, Joe," he said with a grin. "Before Pa eats it all." The joke broke the tension in the air. Tentatively, Giovanni lifted his fork. The first bite of egg was soft, rich, almost shocking. The potatoes were salty and hot. The biscuit crumbled in his mouth, warm and heavy in his empty stomach. He chewed slowly, not because the food was difficult to eat, but because he didn't quite trust it to be real. In his mind, images overlapped. His wife standing in line in Turin with a ration card in her hand, waiting for a slice of bread that might already be gone by the time she reached the counter. His younger brother boiling watery soup, stretching one potato to feed 4 people. Bombs had shaken their walls while they ate. Here the loudest sound was the tick of a clock on the wall and the faint hiss of bacon fat in the pan. "Do you always eat like this?" Giovanni asked suddenly, his English clumsy but clear enough. The boy shrugged. "It's just Sunday," he said. "Sometimes it's better." Better. He couldn't imagine what better looked like. After breakfast, the real work began. Out in the fields, the air smelled of earth and plant sap and sweat. The sun climbed higher, and the rows of corn seemed to stretch all the way to the horizon. Giovanni knew this world. Not this country, but this work. He had grown up in the Piedmont, cutting hay before he knew how to read, tying bundles with fingers that still remembered the feel of twine. His hands moved almost automatically, even after years of war. The farmer watched him for a while, then nodded with quiet approval. "He knows what he's doing," he muttered to the sergeant. The guard grunted. "Most of them do. They're farm boys too, just on the wrong side of the ocean." By noon, Giovanni's shirt was damp with sweat, but his body felt oddly satisfied. This was labor he understood, straightforward, honest in a way war had never been. They broke for lunch under the shade of an oak tree. The farmer's wife brought out sandwiches wrapped in paper, slices of ham, thick with mustard, and jars of cold water sweating in the heat. The guards stood nearby, rifles slung more like an accessory than a threat. Giovanni noticed something strange. When the sandwiches were handed out, the prisoners received theirs first. The guards waited. So did the farmer. He remembered a rumor from camp. Sometimes Italian prisoners were treated better than the poorest American laborers. He hadn't believed it. Now he wasn't sure. "Why?" he asked quietly as he unwrapped his lunch. The farmer misunderstood. "Why what?" Giovanni gestured toward the food. "We first, you after." The farmer shrugged. "You're the ones doing most of the work today." It was said so casually, as if it were obvious, as if history and flags and battlefields had nothing to do with lines for food. When the day was over, the truck returned to take the POWs back to camp. The boy ran alongside it as it rolled down the dirt road. "See you tomorrow, Joe," he shouted, waving hard enough to almost fall. Giovanni lifted a hand in return, surprised at how natural the gesture felt. Inside the truck, pressed between other tired men, he stared at his palms. They were blistered, yes, dirty, calloused, but not bleeding, not shaking from hunger. He thought of the breakfast, the lunch, the way the farmer's wife had refilled his coffee without fear, as if refilling a neighbor's cup. He thought of something he had written in a letter home the week before, when he still worked only inside the camp. "They feed us. I do not understand why." Now the confusion went deeper. That night, back in the barracks, Giovanni opened a small envelope, printed with the American eagle. Inside were coupons, rectangular, thin, with numbers and English words he could barely read. "For a prisoner," the camp officer explained in slow, practiced English. "You work, the farmer signs the paper, the government credits your account. You can use these in the PX commissary to buy things. Soap, cigarettes, sometimes chocolate. You cannot send money home, but you can live better here. Live better here." The words felt heavy. He walked into the camp store the next day, the bell above the door, ringing in a way that reminded him of the farmhouse. Shelves held soap, razors, postcards, cheap combs, hard candy in glass jars. A radio crackled in the corner with a swing tune he didn't recognize. Several prisoners stood in line, coupons in their hands, looking both shy and excited. Giovanni stared at a bar of chocolate wrapped in bright paper. He hadn't tasted real chocolate since before the war. He picked it up, turned it over, and placed precious coupons on the counter. The clerk stamped them, uninterested, as if this were the most ordinary transaction in the world. That night, he sat on his bunk and broke the chocolate into small squares, sharing them with the men around him. Some closed their eyes and let the sweetness melt slowly on their tongues. One man laughed softly. "I am a prisoner," he said, "and I eat like a king compared to home." No one argued. They all thought of mothers and wives and children, queuing for food under gray skies, while enemy ships carried abundance to men like them, behind barbed wire. Weeks turned into months. The routine settled into something almost like a normal life. Wake up, roll call, breakfast, load onto trucks, work on the farms, return at dusk. Giovanni began to know the farm as well as the camp. He knew which fence post was loose near the north field. He knew which cow kicked if you stood on her left side. He knew the sound of the screen door at the farmhouse, squeaking exactly the same way every day at noon. He knew the farmer's wife's habit of humming while she kneaded bread. He knew the boy's questions. "Do you have cows in Italy? Do you have Sundays? Do you have baseball?" Giovanni tried to answer, laughing sometimes, stumbling over words. "Yes, we have cows," he would say, "and Sundays. No baseball. We have calcio, football." The boy tried to say calcio, and failed repeatedly, making them both laugh. One chilly afternoon, after a particularly long day of harvesting, the farmer gestured not toward the yard, but toward the house. "Come on in," he said. Giovanni hesitated. This was not breakfast at the start of a day's work. This was something else. The guard arched an eyebrow but did not protest. "Door stays open," he said. "You know the rules." Inside, the table was set more carefully than usual. A roast glistened on a platter. There were candles, their flames wobbly, in the slight draft. The boy bounced in his seat, excited. "Ma made pie," he whispered to Giovanni, as if sharing a military secret. "Apple. You ever had apple pie?" Giovanni had eaten apples. He had eaten pie. But not like this, not in this house, not under these circumstances. They bowed their heads to pray again. This time, the farmer added a line, "And Lord, watch over all the boys far from home, ours and theirs." The pause before theirs was small but real. Giovanni felt it like a weight in his chest. They ate. The meat was tender, the potatoes creamy, the pie sweet enough to make his teeth ache. He found himself telling a story he had not meant to tell, about his father teaching him to prune vines in the vineyard behind their house. "You must cut so it hurts now," his father had said, "so it grows stronger later." The farmer listened, nodding, as if he understood plants in any language. After the meal, the boy ran to another room and returned with a stack of paper and a pencil stub. "Draw your home," he said. Giovanni stared at the blank page. Slowly, he began to sketch the outline of a hill, a narrow house, a few trees. It was clumsy, more memory than map. But when he was done, the boy looked at it with wonder. "It looks like here," he said. "Just different trees." Giovanni wanted to correct him. "No, it's smaller, poorer, louder, more crowded." But he stopped. Instead, he smiled faintly. "Yes," he said, "it looks like here." As winter crept in, coats grew heavier, and so did the conversations. In the camp, rumors about the war spread like smoke. News of Allied advances, talk of Rome, talk of bombing raids, talk of surrender. On the farm, the farmer listened to the radio at night, face lined with worry for his own boys overseas. One in Italy, one in France. Sometimes he would glance at Giovanni, as the announcer named cities that had become battlefields. Neither of them said what they were thinking. That somewhere, perhaps, sons from this farmhouse and sons from Giovanni's village could be pointing guns in each other's direction. One evening, the farmer knocked the ashes from his pipe and said, almost casually, "When this is over, you'll go back." Giovanni nodded. "Say, yes." The farmer hesitated. "What's left for you there?" Giovanni opened his mouth and then closed it again. He didn't know. A destroyed house? A hungry wife? a country that had lost and now had to learn what that meant. Family, he said finally. It was the only answer that mattered. The farmer nodded slowly. That's something, he replied. A lot of folks here are coming back to less. Not long after, orders came down from above. The war in Europe was nearing its end. The Italian front had changed. Some POWs would be moved. Others would be prepared for repatriation. The camp buzzed with nervous energy. Going home should have been everything they wanted. But home had become an unknown country, and here had become something unsettlingly close to comfort. On the farm, the news landed like an early frost. The boy cried when he heard that Joe might not be around for the next harvest. The farmer's wife baked more bread than usual, as if trying to store kindness in the pantry, and the farmer himself sat at the table with a sheet of paper in front of him, pencil hovering over the lines. He was not a man used to writing anything longer than figures in a ledger, but now he was trying to put something complicated into words. A week later, Giovanni watched him walk up to the guard post with an envelope in his hand. The officer slid it open, read silently, then folded it again thoughtfully. "You know this isn't my decision," he said. "I know," the farmer replied, "but I'm asking anyway." The letter was simple, no flowery language, no politics, just a request. If it is at all possible, we would like the prisoner Giovanni Rinaldi to be allowed to remain here after the war as a hired worker. He is honest, hard-working, and we consider him a friend. Friend. Giovanni did not hear the exact words until much later, but he saw their weight in the way the officer looked at him that afternoon. Eyes softer, as if realizing that this enemy alien had become something else in the eyes of Americans. Other farmers wrote letters too, across states and counties. Some were formal, addressed to the War Department. Others were clumsy, addressed only to whom it may concern in Washington. They all said variations of the same unexpected sentence. "We would like our prisoners to stay." Soldiers read these letters in offices far from any field. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Captured men were supposed to be liabilities, not assets whose absence worried civilians. The answer, when it came, was what bureaucracy always says to feelings it cannot measure. No, POWs would be repatriated in stages, according to international agreements. They could not simply remain as farmhands. Papers, treaties, signatures, things stronger than handshakes and shared meals. The day Giovanni left the farm, the sky was a pale, washed-out blue. The truck idled in the yard. The guard called his name. He stepped forward with a small bundle of belongings, a spare shirt, a worn book in Italian given to him by the farmer's wife, and something else folded flat between the pages. The boy stood stiffly beside the porch, lips pressed tight, trying not to cry. "Here," he said suddenly, thrusting out a piece of paper. Giovanni took it carefully. It was a drawing, crude but unmistakable. A house, a tree, 3 stick figures standing in front. One was taller, one shorter, and one in the middle had hair drawn darker. Underneath, in shaky letters, the boy had written, "Our friend Joe. Not prisoner, not Italian, not enemy, just friend." Giovanni swallowed hard. "Grazie," he said. "Thank you." He wanted to say more, to promise he would return, to explain that returning might not be up to him, but language and time both failed. The farmer shook his hand again, gripping it tighter than the first time. "You take care of yourself, son," he said. "If you ever make it back to this side of the ocean, you know where to find us." The farmer's wife stepped forward, and after a brief hesitation, placed something small and wrapped in cloth in his hands. "For the ship?" she said. Inside, later he found biscuits and a tiny glass vial of dried herbs labeled for soup. As the truck pulled away, Giovanni watched the farmhouse shrink in the distance. The boy ran along the road until he couldn't keep up, the drawing flapping in his hand like a flag. It was not Italian, it was not American. It was something stranger, a banner for a brief peace that had existed inside a war. On the ship crossing the Atlantic, Giovanni sat on deck in the cold wind, coat buttoned tight, the drawing tucked in his pocket like a secret. The sea was gray and endless. Around him, men talked about what waited at home. Some spoke of wives and children, some only spoke of ruins. One night, he took out the drawing and the small stack of letters he had received from the farm, short notes, recipes, a pressed leaf from a tree in the yard. He thought of something he had once written in a censored letter to his wife. America feeds us. I do not know if I deserve it. Now the sentence seemed too small. This was not just about food. It was about being wanted. Italy did not greet him with open arms and tables full of bread. It greeted him with collapsed buildings and empty shelves. Streets he had known were now piles of brick. His village looked smaller than it did in his drawings, as if it had shrunk from fear. His wife had survived. His brother hadn't. His mother's hair had gone white. At first they did not believe his stories. They imagined camps like those in the East, places of starvation and brutality. When he spoke of farms, kitchens, and apple pie, his wife's eyes narrowed. "You were a prisoner," she said. "Are you sure?" He held out the drawing. "They wanted me to stay," he said quietly. That was the strangest part. News of POW experiences spread slowly through towns and families. Some men had been held in Britain, others in Russia, others nowhere at all, because they had never been captured. They had simply walked home from distant fronts. Those who had been in America often sounded different. They spoke of abundance, of decency, of farmers who had trusted them with tools and sometimes with children. They did not deny that they had been behind fences, but they described a captivity full of contradictions. "They treated me like a man," one said at a village gathering, "sometimes better than my own army did." The more Giovanni tried to settle back into his old life, the more the memories of the American farm refused to fade. He found himself comparing every empty shelf in the market to the full pantry he'd seen in the farmhouse. Every cracked wall to the solid boards of the barn. Every suspicious glance to the way the boy had looked at him with simple curiosity. Letters began to arrive from America this time. The boy wrote in uneven lines, talking about the weather, the crops, asking crude questions about Italy. "Is your house fixed yet? Do you still have cows? Do you still think of us?" The farmer wrote too, more briefly. "We're all right," one letter said. "The boys came home. We thank God for that. The harvest is good. We've been short-handed since you left. It's not the same without you." At the bottom, almost as an afterthought, he added, "If you ever wish to return, we will vouch for you. It would be work, hard work, but it would be yours as a free man." A free man. The phrase pierced deeper than any bullet had. By the late 1940s, Italy struggled through reconstruction. Jobs were scarce. Food was still rationed in some areas. Giovanni worked odd labor whenever he could get it. He patched walls, dug ditches, unloaded crates at the rail station. At night he unfolded the American letter until the paper grew thin at the creases. Could he really go back? Was it right to even want that? He loved his country. He loved his family. But the future here felt like an endless series of days spent waiting for something that might never come. One evening, sitting at the table with his wife, he laid the letter in front of her. "They say I can work there," he said. "Legally. Not as a prisoner, as an immigrant." She traced the English words with her finger. She had learned enough from him and from church charity programs to understand the meaning, if not the grammar. "You want to leave again?" she asked quietly. He shook his head. "I don't want to leave. I want a life. And I remember how they treated me, even when they had every reason not to." It was not an easy decision. It meant paperwork, interviews, waiting. It meant trusting governments again, after governments had sent him to war. But he was not alone. Across Italy, former POWs were doing the same, writing letters to American families who had once fed them, asking if the offer still stood. In living rooms across the ocean, farmers unfolded these letters with hands thicker and older than before, smiled and went to their desks to write back, "Yes, come, we will help." Years later, a train pulled into a small American station. A man stepped down wearing a cheap suit and holding a single suitcase. Giovanni felt his heart hammering like it had on the first day he saw the farmhouse. But this time he was not under guard. No one watched him as a prisoner. He walked toward the exit, scanning faces. There, the farmer, older now, shoulders slightly stooped. The boy, taller, nearly a man himself. The farmer's wife, eyes wet. For a moment, none of them moved. Then the boy, no, the young man crossed the platform in a few strides and wrapped Giovanni in a hug that nearly knocked the breath out of him. "Joe," he said into his shoulder, "you came back." Giovanni laughed. The sound half choked. "You wrote," he answered. They drove back to the farm along a road he recognized, and yet did not. New fences, new signs, the same sky, The same house, with new paint on the shutters. The dog was different, but the porch still creaked in the same place. Inside, the table was set, not in celebration of victory, in celebration of return. There was work to do. There were papers to sign. There were awkward conversations with neighbors who did not quite understand why a former enemy was now living down the road. But Fields did not care about politics. Cows needed milking. Fences needed mending. Giovanni slipped back into the rhythm like a hand sliding into a worn glove. Only this time, when the harvest ended, he did not climb onto a truck to go back behind wire. He took off his boots on the porch of the farmhouse and left them by the door. He did not forget Italy. He sent money home, letters, photographs of himself standing in American fields. His wife joined him later, after more papers, more waiting. Their children would grow up with 2 languages at the table. Italian words for love and discipline, English words for weather and work. Sometimes on Sundays, they would sit at that same table with the farmer and his family, eating roast and pie, passing dishes between hands that had once belonged to enemy nations. Once, at a town gathering, someone asked Giovanni what it had been like to be a POW. The question was clumsy, but sincere. He thought of fences, of barracks, of the first shock of captivity. He thought of the first breakfast, the first handshake, the letter asking the government to let him stay. It was strange, he said slowly. I was locked in. Yes, I was watched. But I was also treated like a man. Sometimes more than I expected. Sometimes more than I deserved. The listener frowned. And that's why you came back. Giovanni smiled faintly. No, I came back because they wanted me here. That is something a man doesn't forget. Decades later, the farm changed hands on paper, but not in spirit. The boy who had once drawn our friend Joe grew into a man who co-owned the land with Giovanni. Their children called each other cousins, even though no blood said so. The drawing hung, framed now, in a hallway that smelled of dust and old wood. Visitors rarely noticed it, but the family did. It was a reminder that once, in the middle of a global war, a child had decided to see a prisoner as a friend. In old age, Giovanni sat on the porch in a chair that had become shaped to his body over the years. His hands were no longer calloused enough for heavy work, but his mind was sharp. A journalist visited once, researching a piece about former POWs who had returned to America. The man clicked his pen, flipped open a notebook, and asked, "What shocked you the most about your time here as a prisoner?" Giovanni looked out over the fields, the same fields he had once worked under guard, then as an employee, then as an owner. He spoke slowly. Each word weighed. I was shocked, he said, that when I was at my weakest, defeated, captured, wearing clothes that were not mine, strangers decided I was worth feeding, worth paying, worth inviting into their homes. He paused, then added, and I was even more shocked that when the war ended, they did not want to see me go. The journalist wrote it down mechanically, not realizing that for Giovanni, this was not just a nice quote. It was the foundation of his second life. War teaches men to see each other as monsters. It trains them to recognize flags before faces, uniforms before names. But on American farms during the Second World War, something different happened. Men arrived by truck and train, wearing the label enemy. They expected chains and cruelty. Instead, they found fields that needed hands, tables that needed chairs filled, and families willing, sometimes reluctantly, sometimes bravely, to offer both. Italian POWs were shocked when American farmers wanted them to stay. Shocked that letters were written on their behalf. Shocked that children learned their names. Shocked that a country that owed them nothing had given them work, food, and a kind of quiet dignity. Some went home and never returned, carrying those memories like lanterns in the ruins of post-war Europe. Others followed those lanterns back across the ocean and built entire lives where they had once spent their days behind barbed wire. History remembers the battles, the speeches, the treaties. It does not always remember the Sunday dinners, the shared jokes over broken English, the moment when a farmer slid an extra biscuit onto a prisoner's plate. But those small gestures had consequences that outlasted the war itself. They shaped families. They changed how former enemies raised their children. They turned enemy territory into the place where I was treated like a man. In the end, Giovanni Rinaldi's story was not just about one Italian prisoner or one American farm. It was about the strange power of ordinary kindness, in a time when the world seemed dedicated to proving that cruelty was stronger. He once told his grandson, who listened with wide eyes and an American accent, "I came here in chains. I stayed here by choice." The boy frowned, trying to understand. "How can that be, Nonno?" Giovanni looked out at the fields, at the sky, at the house whose door had opened when it had every reason to stay closed. "Because," he said softly, "war tells you who to hate. But sometimes, work and bread and shared tables, they tell you who you can live with. War divides nations with guns and flags. Peace, when it comes, is rarely announced with trumpets. It slips in quietly, through a kitchen door, across a field at sunset, in a letter that says, 'If you want to come back, there is a place for you here.'" For Italian POWs on American farms, that was the most shocking thing of all. Not that they survived captivity, but that out of captivity, a different kind of belonging was born.